They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when that blood runs cold, when the people who should love you most leave you bleeding in the wreckage of a school bus while saving your sister instead? That's the day I learned the truth. Some vows are meant to be broken, and some families are worth destroying. The rain hammered against the windows of the school bus that afternoon, each drop like a tiny fist pounding against the glass. I sat in the middle rows, my earbuds blasting punk rock loud enough to drown out Skylar's insufferable giggling 3 seats ahead. She was showing her friends some video on her phone, probably another one of those makeup tutorials or whatever vapid content she consumed like oxygen. The other girls clustered around her like moths to a flame, laughing at her jokes, complimenting her new designer jacket. The same jacket I'd asked Dad for last Christmas, only to be told we couldn't afford it. Funny how money suddenly appeared when Skylar wanted something. I pressed my forehead against the cold window, watching the world blur into streaks of gray and green. The sky had turned an ugly shade of bruised purple, the kind that promised a storm. Something felt off that day, a tightness in my chest that I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was just the usual weight of being invisible in my own family, or maybe it was something darker, some premonition that my life was about to shatter like the glass that would soon explode around me. The bus driver, Mr. Henderson, had both hands gripped tight on the wheel. I could see the tension in his shoulders from where I Saturday. The road had become slick, treacherous. Other cars crawled past us, their headlights cutting through the sheets of rain. I should have felt safe. School buses were supposed to be the safest vehicles on the road, weren't they? That's what they always told us during those mandatory safety assemblies. Then, everything happened at once. A sedan hydroplaned across the center line, spinning like a carnival ride gone wrong. Mr. Henderson jerked the wheel hard to the right. Tires screamed against wet asphalt. Someone behind me started screaming. The bus tilted, and for one impossible moment, we seemed to float, suspended between safety and catastrophe. Then gravity remembered its job, and we crashed into the concrete median with a sound like the world ending. Metal shrieked. Glass exploded into 1,000 glittering knives. Bodies flew forward against seatbacks. The impact threw me hard against the seat in front of me, and I felt something in my chest crack. But worse was the sensation of the seat behind me collapsing forward, pinning my right leg beneath twisted metal and torn upholstery. The pain was immediate and absolute, a white-hot scream that traveled from my trapped ankle all the way up to my brain. I tried to move, tried to pull myself free, but the weight was impossible. Blood pooled beneath me, warm and sticky, soaking into my jeans. All around me, other students were crying, calling for help, checking on friends. The smell of gasoline mixed with the copper scent of blood. Somewhere in the chaos I heard Skylar wailing, that high-pitched cry she always used when she wanted attention. Then I heard my father's voice cutting through the confusion. Dad had been following the bus in his car, on his way to pick up Skylar for some after-school activity she'd insisted on. His voice boomed with authority as he climbed onto the tilted bus, calling out for survivors. Hope exploded in my chest, momentarily overshadowing the agony in my leg. "Dad!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "Dad, I'm here! My leg is stuck! Please!" I watched him wade through the debris, his eyes scanning the wreckage. For one beautiful second, I thought he was looking for me. Then his gaze locked onto Skylar, who was sitting in her seat with nothing more than a few scratches on her perfect face. She was crying, of course, playing up the drama like she always did. Her expensive jacket wasn't even torn. "Daddy!" she shrieked, reaching out her arms like a toddler. "Daddy! I was so scared." He rushed to her, checking her over with a gentleness I'd never seen directed at me. His hands cupped her face, smoothing back her blonde hair. She clung to him, burying her face in his chest. "Dad, please." I called again, my voice weaker now. "I'm hurt. My leg, I can't get it out." He turned his head, and our eyes met across the destroyed bus. For one moment, I saw something flicker in his expression. Not concern. Not love. Just a cold calculation, like he was weighing the value of 2 objects and deciding which one was worth saving. Then he leaned down close to my ear, close enough that I could smell the expensive cologne he wore, and whispered words that would burn themselves into my memory forever. "Skylar is worth something. You're just collateral damage." The words hit harder than the bus crash. I watched, paralyzed by pain and shock, as he scooped Skylar into his arms and started carrying her toward the emergency exit. She looked back at me over his shoulder, and I saw her face clearly. No tears now. Just a small, cruel smile twisting her lips. "Don't waste your time, Dad," she said, her voice carrying back to me. She's always been useless anyway. Then they were gone, swallowed by the rain and the gathering crowd of first responders. I lay there in my own blood, trapped beneath metal, while strangers worked frantically to free me. The paramedics told me later that I was lucky. The piece of metal had missed my major arteries by centimeters. Lucky. That was the word they used while my father stood outside with Skylar wrapped in a blanket, accepting sympathies from neighbors and refusing to even look in my direction. The hospital was sterile and cold, so different from the chaos of the crash. They'd given me something for the pain, but it only dulled the physical agony. Nothing touched the wound in my chest, the place where my father's words had buried themselves like shrapnel. My leg was in a cast from ankle to hip, held together with pins and prayers. The doctors said I'd walk again, but it would take time and intensive physical therapy. They said I was a fighter, a survivor. If only they knew how right they were. 2 days after the surgery, my family finally visited. Not to comfort me, not to apologize. Richard walked into my hospital room like he owned it, Eleanor trailing behind him with her head down, and Skylar bouncing in with a balloon that said, "Get well soon," in cheerful letters. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. "You're still clinging on?" Richard said, looking at me like I was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. "What a waste of a hospital bed. Do you have any idea how much this is costing?" I stared at him, unable to process that these words were really coming from my father's mouth. Eleanor wouldn't meet my eyes, just stood there, studying her manicured nails like they held the secrets of the universe. Skylar perched on the edge of the visitor's chair, playing with the balloon string. "I told you, Dad," she said with a laugh. "She's always been a loser, can't even get off a bus right." Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, clean break, like a bone that's been weakened by too many fractures, and finally gives way. "I'm your daughter too," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "How can you talk to me like this? I almost died." Richard leaned over my bed, his face close to mine. His expression was cold, calculated, completely devoid of paternal warmth. "No," he said clearly, enunciating each word. "You're just a mistake life dumped on us. Skylar has value. She's going places. You've always been nothing but a burden. The sooner you accept that, the better off everyone will be." They left after that, taking their toxic presence with them. Eleanor hadn't said a single word the entire visit. Just stood there like a shadow, complicit in her silence. The balloon Skylar had brought bobbed against the ceiling, mocking me with its false cheerfulness. That night, alone in my hospital room with only the beeping monitors for company, I made a promise to myself. If they wanted me broken, they would pay. All of them. They'd thrown me away like garbage, discarded me in their twisted hierarchy of worth. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. They'd assumed that because I'd always been quiet, always been the forgotten child, that I would simply accept this final rejection and fade away. They were wrong. The physical therapy was brutal. Every session felt like someone was taking a hammer to my bones, but I pushed through it. No family members came to watch my progress or offer encouragement. I was alone in the sterile PT room with its encouraging posters and bored therapists who saw me as just another case number. But I used that isolation, turned it into fuel. Every painful step I took, every exercise that made me want to scream, I channeled that agony into determination. 6 months after the accident, I could walk without crutches. 8 months, and I could jog. By the 1-year anniversary, I was running 5 miles every morning before school. My body had been broken, but I'd remade it into something stronger. The limp would probably never fully disappear, but I wore it like a badge of honor now. A reminder of what I'd survived, and what I was capable of enduring. But physical strength wasn't enough. I spent hours at the public library, devouring books on psychology, manipulation, business strategy. I taught myself coding from free online courses, learned about digital forensics, studied the art of social engineering. If my family had taught me anything, it was that power came from knowing people's weaknesses and exploiting them. I would become an expert in exactly that. My room at home had been ransacked while I was in the hospital. Half my belongings were gone, donated or thrown away to make room for more of Skylar's things. My small dresser had been replaced with her overflow shoe collection. The posters on my walls had been torn down and replaced with her fashion magazine cutouts. It was like they were trying to erase me from the house entirely. I didn't complain. I smiled and thanked Eleanor when she mumbled some excuse about needing the space. I watched, learned, and planned. Skylar loved flaunting her new clothes and jewelry, all bought with money that supposedly didn't exist when I needed school supplies or new shoes. Richard spent hours in his home office, door locked, conducting his shady business deals. Eleanor tended her prize-winning rose garden with more care than she'd ever shown her own daughter. I memorized their patterns, their routines, their little secrets. Richard had coffee every morning at the Daily Grind, a pretentious cafe downtown where he met with his business associates and pretended to be an upstanding citizen. Eleanor and Skylar shopped every weekend at Elite Boutique, dropping thousands on designer clothes and accessories. Richard played golf every Sunday at Greenwood Hills Country Club, maintaining his image as a successful businessman. They'd created this perfect little life for themselves, built on the foundation of my pain and rejection. It was beautiful, really, beautiful and fragile, and I was going to shatter it piece by piece. I started small. Richard kept his laptop in his home office, password protected but not encrypted. He was arrogant enough to believe no one in his family would dare invade his privacy. One night, while everyone slept, I slipped into his office with a USB drive loaded with keylogging software. It took me 20 minutes to install it on his machine, another 10 to make sure it was completely hidden. After that, every password, every email, every private message was mine to access. What I found was a goldmine of corruption. Richard wasn't just a small-time businessman cutting corners. He was involved in serious fraud, tax evasion, bribery. He had shell companies in 3 different states, moved money around like a magician with cards, always one step ahead of the IRS. He'd built his empire on lies and stolen funds, and he'd gotten away with it because no one had bothered to look closely. Everyone saw what he wanted them to see: a successful man with a beautiful family and a thriving business. I copied everything. Bank statements, emails discussing illegal deals, recorded phone calls where he bragged about screwing over his partners. Every piece of evidence I could find, I saved in multiple encrypted locations. But I didn't move yet. Patience was key. Rush in too early, and he might slip away. I needed to build an airtight case, something so comprehensive that there would be no escape. Eleanor was easier. Her entire identity was wrapped up in 2 things: her social status and her roses. The garden she'd cultivated behind our house had won awards at the county fair 3 years running. She spent hours pruning, fertilizing, talking to her precious flowers like they were her real children. Maybe they were. They certainly got more affection than I ever had. I researched plant diseases, chemical compounds, the subtle art of horticultural sabotage. Then, one evening while Eleanor was at her book club, I visited her garden with a spray bottle filled with a carefully mixed solution. Not enough to kill the roses outright. That would be too obvious, too easily traced to vandalism. No, I wanted them to sicken slowly, mysteriously, despite Eleanor's best efforts to save them. I wanted her to watch them wither and die while feeling completely helpless. Within a week, the leaves started yellowing. By 2 weeks, the prize-winning blooms were dropping petals like tears. Eleanor was beside herself, calling in garden experts, treating the soil, adjusting water levels. Nothing worked. She couldn't understand what was happening to her beloved roses. I watched her cry over those plants with more emotion than she'd shown when I was lying broken in a hospital bed, and I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Skylar was the most fun to torment because she lived so much of her life online. Her social media presence was carefully curated perfection: beautiful photos, inspirational quotes, humble brags about her expensive lifestyle. She had thousands of followers who envied her seemingly perfect life. She'd built her entire identity on being better than everyone else, on being the chosen one, the special daughter who deserved everything. It was almost too easy to crack her passwords. She used the same one for everything: her birthday followed by princess. Typical. I accessed her accounts late at night, scrolling through her direct messages, her private photos, her real personality that she hid behind filters and fake smiles. She was crueler online than in person, mocking girls she pretended to be friends with, making fun of people's appearances, bragging about manipulating boys who liked her. I started with small changes. A slight edit to a photo caption that made her seem more arrogant than aspirational. A private message accidentally sent to the wrong person, revealing what she really thought about her best friend. A post scheduled for 2 a.m. with controversial opinions I knew would alienate her followers. Nothing traceable, nothing obvious. Just little cracks in her perfect facade. Within a month, her social media presence started crumbling. Friends began calling her out for being fake. Brands that had sent her free products for promotion stopped contacting her. Boys she'd strung along started comparing notes and realizing how she'd played them against each other. Her follower count dropped, her comment section filled with criticism, and I watched her spiral into panic as the digital kingdom she'd built came crashing down. At school, she couldn't understand what was happening. She'd snap at her friends, accuse them of betraying her, grow paranoid about who was really on her side. Her grades started slipping because she was too obsessed with trying to rebuild her online reputation. Teachers noticed her distraction, called home to express concern. Richard and Eleanor blamed her for being irresponsible, never suspecting that their forgotten daughter was orchestrating the entire collapse. I was patient. I was methodical. Every move I made was calculated, every consequence considered. They taught me that I was worthless, that I didn't matter. But what they failed to understand was that being underestimated is its own kind of power. No one pays attention to the ghost in the corner. No one guards their secrets from someone they've dismissed as irrelevant. 2 years after the bus crash, I was ready. I had everything I needed. Evidence of Richard's crimes, documentation of Eleanor's complicity in my abuse and neglect, records of Skylar's bullying and harassment. I'd graduated early, gotten accepted to college on a full scholarship they knew nothing about. I was 18 now, legally an adult, free to make my own choices. The day I chose for my revenge was the anniversary of the crash. Poetic, I thought. 2 years ago, they'd left me bleeding in wreckage. Today, I'd return the favor. I made reservations at the Gilded Spoon, the most expensive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where appearances mattered, where the elite gathered to see and be seen. I told my family it was a celebration, that I wanted to thank them for everything they'd done for me. Richard was suspicious, but his ego won out. The idea of his worthless daughter finally recognizing her place, showing proper gratitude, appealed to him. They dressed up for the occasion. Richard in his designer suit, Eleanor in her pearls, Skylar in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. They walked into that restaurant like they owned it, heads high, radiating the confidence of people who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. I was already seated at our table when they arrived, wearing a simple black dress I'd bought with money from my part-time job at the library. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. I smiled as they sat down, played the part of the grateful daughter one last time. We ordered appetizers. Richard talked about his business, dropping names of important clients he'd impressed. Eleanor discussed the new gardening techniques she was trying, still unable to understand why her roses had failed. Skylar checked her phone constantly, stressed about her dwindling social media presence, not noticing that I was watching her every move. Then, halfway through the main course, I excused myself. Told them I needed to use the restroom. Instead, I went to the restaurant's AV room, where I'd bribed a tech-savvy waiter to help me set up. I'd paid him $500, money I'd saved over 2 years, and promised him $1,000 more if everything went smoothly. He was a college student drowning in debt. He didn't ask questions. I returned to the table just as the restaurant's main screen, usually used for wine lists and special promotions, flickered to life. Every diner in the restaurant looked up, curious. My family did too, their faces still relaxed, unsuspecting. The video I'd compiled began to play. It opened with footage from the bus crash, taken from someone's cell phone, showing Richard pulling Skylar from the wreckage while I screamed for help in the background. The audio was crystal clear. My desperate cries for my father, his cold dismissal, Skylar's cruel laughter as they walked away. The restaurant went silent. Every person in that room heard my father call me collateral damage. Every person heard my sister call me useless. Every person watched them leave me trapped and bleeding while they saved themselves. Richard's face went white, then red. He started to stand, but the video wasn't finished. It cut to footage I'd recorded secretly in our home, conversations where they discussed how I was a burden, how they wished I'd just disappear, how the money they spent on my medical bills was a waste. Eleanor's voice, usually so soft and passive, agreeing that I was a disappointment. Then came the real evidence, bank statements showing Richard's fraud, emails discussing bribes and illegal dealings, tax documents that had been falsified, screenshots of Skylar's cruel messages, her real personality laid bare for everyone to see. Every dirty secret, every hidden crime, displayed in high definition for the entire restaurant to witness. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard roared, finally finding his voice. He lunged across the table toward me, his face twisted with rage. Other diners gasped, chairs scraping as people backed away. I didn't flinch. I'd learned self-defense over the past 2 years, learned how to read body language and anticipate attacks. I stood up calmly, stepping out of his reach with practiced ease. "I'm doing what you should have done 2 years ago," I said, my voice carrying across the silent restaurant. "I'm making a choice about who has value and who doesn't, and I've decided that you, all three of you, are worthless." Eleanor started crying, her hands covering her face. Skylar looked around wildly, realizing that every eye in the room was on them, judging them. Her precious reputation was crumbling in real time. "Do you remember what you told me in that hospital room, Dad?" I continued, savoring this moment I'd dreamed about for 2 years. "You said I was just a mistake, that Skylar was the one worth something." "Well, congratulations. You taught me exactly what I needed to know about value, about worth, about family. You taught me that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need to destroy." The sound of sirens cut through the night air. I'd timed everything perfectly. The evidence I'd compiled had been sent to the police, the IRS, Richard's business partners, and several news outlets, all scheduled to arrive at exactly this moment. I'd given them everything they needed to put my father away for years. Police officers entered the restaurant, their presence commanding immediate attention. They approached our table with purpose, and I watched my father's face as he realized what was happening. The fear in his eyes was beautiful. "Richard Morrison?" one officer said. "You're under arrest for fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit bribery. You have the right to remain silent." They handcuffed him right there in the restaurant while dozens of witnesses watched. His protests fell on deaf ears. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. I'd made sure of that. Eleanor collapsed back into her chair, her perfect image shattered. She'd enabled his crimes, helped him hide assets, signed false documents. She was complicit, and the investigators would figure that out soon enough. Even if she avoided jail time, her social standing was destroyed. No more book clubs, no more charity galas, no more pretending to be a pillar of the community. Skylar grabbed my arm as I walked past, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. "How could you do this?" she hissed. "We're family." I looked down at her hand, then up at her face. She was crying, her makeup running, no longer beautiful. Just scared and pathetic. "You're right," I said softly. "We are family, and you taught me everything I needed to know about what that really means. Absolutely nothing." I pulled my arm free and walked out of that restaurant with my head high. Behind me, I could hear the chaos continuing, voices raised in shock and judgment, phones recording every moment for social media. By morning, the Morrison family would be infamous. Everything they'd built, every relationship they'd cultivated, every bit of respect they'd earned through lies and manipulation, would be ashes. The trial lasted 6 months. I watched from the gallery as Richard's empire crumbled in painful detail. His business partners testified against him, eager to distance themselves from his crimes. The evidence I'd gathered formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. He tried to paint me as a vindictive daughter, claimed I'd fabricated everything out of spite. But numbers don't lie, and neither do bank records or recorded phone calls. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Eleanor was charged as an accessory and received 3 years of probation, along with massive fines that wiped out what remained of their assets. Their house, the one I'd grown up in, was seized to pay back Richard's victims. Eleanor ended up in a small apartment on the wrong side of town, her roses just a memory. Skylar had a different kind of reckoning. She wasn't charged with any crimes, but she didn't need to be. Her reputation was destroyed. Colleges rescinded their offers. Friends abandoned her. She became known as the girl whose family was exposed as frauds, the sister who'd watched her father leave someone to die. She had to transfer schools twice before graduating, and even then, she left town the day after getting her diploma, unable to face the judgment and whispers that followed her everywhere. I should have felt satisfied. I'd accomplished everything I'd set out to do. They'd all paid the price for what they'd done to me. But revenge, I discovered, was a hollow victory. It filled the void for a moment, then left you empty again, wondering what comes next. I moved away for college, started over in a city where no one knew my name or my story. I changed my last name legally, severing the final tie to the family that had rejected me. I focused on my studies, made real friends, people who valued me for who I was, rather than what I could provide them. But the scars remained, not just the physical ones, the limp that still showed when I was tired, but the deeper wounds that couldn't be seen. I had trust issues. I pushed people away before they could hurt me. I saw manipulation and betrayal in innocent actions, because I'd been trained to expect the worst from the people closest to me. Therapy helped. It took me 2 years to even admit I needed it, to acknowledge that destroying my family hadn't healed the damage they'd caused. I spent hours in a comfortable office with a patient therapist who taught me that revenge and justice weren't the same thing, that healing required more than just punishing the people who hurt you. I learned about boundaries, about the difference between being cautious and being paranoid. I learned that not everyone was like my family, that there were people capable of genuine love and support. It was hard work, harder in some ways than the physical therapy after the crash. But slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild myself into something more than just a survivor seeking vengeance. 5 years after that night at the Gilded Spoon, I graduated with honors from college. I had a degree in computer science and job offers from 3 different companies. I'd published papers on digital security and given talks at conferences. I'd built a life on my own terms, one that had nothing to do with the family that had tried to break me. I didn't attend my graduation ceremony. The idea of sitting in a crowd, of being vulnerable and exposed, still made me anxious. But that evening, I celebrated with the friends I'd made, people who knew my story and loved me anyway. We went to a quiet restaurant, nothing fancy, and toasted to new beginnings. My phone rang during dessert. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Cassidy? The voice was hesitant, broken. It took me a moment to place it. Eleanor. I excused myself from the table, walked outside into the warm evening air. What do you want? I just wanted to say congratulations. I saw online that you graduated today, with honors. Silence stretched between us. I could hear traffic in the background on her end, the sound of a life much smaller than the one she'd once lived. How did you get this number? I asked, my voice flat. I hired a private investigator. It took months to find you. You really covered your tracks. That was the point. Another pause. Then, quietly, I'm sorry, Cassidy, for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar anger rising, but beneath it was something else, something more complicated. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe never. But perhaps a recognition that Eleanor had been a victim too, trapped in her own way by Richard's domination and her own weakness. Thank you for calling, I said finally. I appreciate the apology, but I don't think I'm ready for more than that. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. You became everything we said you couldn't be. You're stronger than all of us combined. She hung up before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, holding my phone, feeling tears I didn't want to acknowledge sliding down my face. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't healing. It was just a moment of acknowledgement, a tiny crack in the wall of anger I'd built around myself. I wiped my eyes and went back inside to my friends, to the life I'd built from the ashes of the old one. They asked if everything was okay, and I smiled and said yes, and meant it more than I ever had before. The truth is, some relationships can't be repaired. Some wounds cut too deep, some betrayals are too fundamental. My family broke me in ways that could never be fully fixed, and I destroyed them in return. There was no happy ending where we all hugged and forgave each other and moved forward together. But there was this. I was free. Free from their expectations, free from their cruelty, free from the weight of being the child they didn't want. I'd learned to value myself independent of their judgment. I'd learned that blood relation doesn't make someone family, that real family is chosen, built from respect and genuine care. I still have bad days. Days when I wonder if I went too far, if destroying them was really necessary, if maybe there could have been another way. Days when I miss having a family, even a toxic one, because at least it was something familiar. Days when the loneliness feels overwhelming, when I wonder if anyone will ever truly know me, all of me, the darkness and the light. But then I remember that moment in the bus, trapped and bleeding, watching my father walk away. I remember his words. Collateral damage. I remember Skylar's cruel smile. I remember every birthday ignored, every accomplishment dismissed, every plea for love met with indifference or contempt. And I remember that I survived. More than survived. I became something they never thought possible. I became valuable on my own terms, in my own way. I learned that worth isn't assigned by others. It's inherent, unchangeable, something that exists independent of recognition or approval. They called me worthless, but it was that supposed worthlessness that gave me the freedom to reinvent myself without their constraints. They tried to break me, and in the breaking, I was reforged into something they could never control or diminish. A vow was broken that day in the bus. The unspoken promise between parent and child, the expectation of unconditional love and protection. They broke it first, shattered it completely. What I did afterward was simply claiming justice in the only way available to me. I don't regret it. Not the planning, not the execution, not the outcome. They made their choices, prioritized what they valued, showed me exactly who they were. I believed them, and I responded accordingly. Now, I'm 23 years old. I have a career I love, friends who support me, a therapist who helps me navigate the complicated landscape of my trauma. I volunteer at a youth center, working with kids who've been forgotten or abused by their families, trying to give them the support I never had. I'm not fixed. I'm not healed. I probably never will be completely, but I'm whole in my own way, built from broken pieces that didn't quite fit back together the same way they started. And maybe that's okay. Maybe being broken and rebuilt makes you something stronger, something more resilient. Sometimes I wonder about them. Richard is still in prison, with 9 years left on his sentence. I've never visited, never written. Eleanor is working at a grocery store, living in a small apartment, apparently sober and going to therapy herself. Skylar moved to California, changed her name, is trying to build a life away from the scandal. We have no contact. We are strangers who happen to share DNA. And me? I'm walking forward, step by painful step, building something real from the wreckage of my past. I'm learning that the opposite of being broken isn't being perfect. It's being authentic, flawed, and valuable exactly as you are. They taught me I was worthless, but in trying to destroy me, they gave me the greatest gift. They taught me to value myself.